welcome Shelley, welcome Yesha, and welcome Hema. We really wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit. Christina shared at the beginning of this session today that this is not a technology conference, and it's still not a technology conference despite the topic we have in front of us, which is responsible leadership in the age of AI. What we're really trying to do with this topic is bring together our DEI messages, but also the thought of leadership. You as technology leaders need to be aware of what's going on with the emergence of AI in our everyday lives, in our solutions, in our organizations. And what we're trying to do with this talk is really understand from people who are going through this journey and have successfully at least embarked on the journey, what are the issues as leaders we need to be thinking about? As we put this topic together, one of the things that really struck me about AI and the dialogue around AI today is that, for me personally, for the first time since the introduction of the threshing machine in England in the 1800s, we have a technology that is fundamentally impacting not only our capabilities as organizations to be productive, but having fundamental impacts on us as humans. So I think it's important for us to talk about that humanistic aspect of AI and how we implement and realize this in our organizations. What I'd like to do is welcome our panelists. Maybe we could start with Hema here, who's live with us, and ask you to introduce yourselves, explain the roles in your organizations, and then we'll open it up the discussion around those humanistic aspects of implementing AI as leaders.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me? I guess
Yep.
I can hear myself. Nice to be here. My name is Hema Chamraj. My name is pretty long, but it is Hema, like a boy calling his mom, Hema. So it's pretty easy to remember. And I was just watching the discussion, and I see that there's so much work that's being done, but AI is one of those technologies that all of us, have to be involved in some way or the other, because we have to shape it. Because we talked about tech and all the issues that are there, but this is going to be much more amplified. So in that sense, it requires all of us to be thinking, and I'm glad that, even though I'm not part of the Hollywood entertainment side, I want to bring in some perspective so you can see why you all will have a role to play, and we have to. And because it's going to affect every person, every product, every business, and so on, in good and bad ways. So I'm very happy to be here, to be talking about it. We'll talk about the technology part of it, but the human element is the most important one, and I want to talk more about that. And
Great.
As far as my background, I was listening to people who went through the STEM programs. I am a computer science engineer who has worked in the business for the last 20 plus years. I'll leave it at that. And I have my family, my kids who are going to college, that are going through some of the problems that was called out here. So very, very interested to continue the discussion on what we could do more. But I'm in the tech industry, and I've been working on AI for the last 6+ years, trying to drive technology into some of these areas like health and life sciences, because that's one of the areas it will be right. You will see the impact right away if we don't do it right. So I want to talk more about that if we get a chance, but that's where my background is.
Excellent, thank you. Yesha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone. It is wonderful to get to be with you all today. I'm so sorry that I could not be there in 3D as much as I would have wanted to be, but thank you so very much for having me in this incredible conversation with such an incredible group of people. So I'm a professor of law, and that seems really uncool, frankly. It seems incredibly
She
sad
really is cool.
and I know, super uncool. I'm just gonna own it. Particularly given Hema's, incredible background, Shelley's, fantastic, and Nina, obviously. The reason I'm here on this panel, the reason I'm kind of passionate about being with you guys today is because This topic is just a crazy hard one to regulate. This is one that, as Hema mentioned, as Shelley will talk about, is going to affect every inch of our lives. It's going to affect so many ways in which the societal processes that we're so used to, whether it be how we access finance, how we get resources, housing, how we're marketing, all of these different aspects of our lives, and those that we would rather keep to ourselves, like privacy, are going to be affected so deeply. And yet, our chances of getting a good regulatory framework in place for this, both at the state level and at the federal level, looks pretty aspirational and far away at present. And so there's a lot for us to do as people, as industry, within this space, to be able to create those structures that can keep us kind of safe, protected, as well as obviously allow for masses of innovation and flourishing in this space. So that's really why I'm here. I'm so happy to get to be a part of this conversation. So thank you guys so much.
Excellent. Thank you. And Shelley.
Yes, likewise. Thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. So I'm Shelley McKinley. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of GitHub. GitHub is a developer platform. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of Microsoft, and we have had the pleasure and honor of shipping the first AI-powered developer tool that's come out of the Microsoft OpenAI relationship that I'm sure people have heard of. We actually, in AI terms or saying Copilot terms, we are like the granddaddy, having shipped our product to technical preview in July of 2021. So well before our last November AI explosion, I would like to call it, when people came out with lots of different announcements about AI. Prior to my role at GitHub, I oversaw corporate responsibility at Microsoft, and one of those things that I did was to help establish what's called today the Office of Responsible AI. So I've been working on AI not nearly as long probably as the other panelists, but for quite a few years now.
Excellent. Thank you, Shelley, and thank you all for joining us. We had some really interesting discussions covering the prep work that we did for this panel, and I'm hoping we get to half of the things we talked about. But the first thing I would really like to open up with is from both Shelley and Hema from AMD is this concept of there being more to implement AI than just learning a technology and embedding it in your products. That there's the dialogue ongoing about governance and fairness and privacy and everything else. There are many things to think about as you begin this journey. So maybe I can open up with Shelley to talk about, the work that you did in the Office of Responsible AI. What are the kinds of things that Microsoft did to start operationalizing this revolution, I guess you could say, within the Microsoft organization? What should people be thinking about?
Sure. I'll try to keep it somewhat short because I know I want to get to a lot of the other topics and the other speakers. But fundamentally, I think it was 2018 at WEF when multiple large companies came out and talked about what their principles were around responsible AI. And at that time, they were just that. They were principles anywhere between, I would say, 4 and 12 different principles that all kind of boiled down to the same sort of concepts of reliability, safety, security, fairness, inclusiveness, transparency, accountability, those kinds of things. And then we all set about the hard work after that of trying to figure out, well, what we say all of this, but really what's important is how do we get these principles and distill them down into practice? And that takes a lot more than just publishing a set of principles. One of the key things that Microsoft has done since then is develop what's called the Responsible AI Standard. And that really takes, it's a standard that really encompasses all of those principles, but principle by principle talks about how you would go about implementing that principle from the development life cycle all the way through deployment, and then certainly in the post-deployment area where you're going to be monitoring and looking and see how things are going. It's something that we're continuing to all develop. I would say our first responsible AI standard was a bit more high level than the standard is now, as we kind of learned what are the practices that we need to put in place for each of these principles. And at Microsoft, it's really a several structured house. So we've got the Office of Responsible AI that's responsible for governing and setting the standard. setting the processes, doing reviews. We have this wonderful team at Microsoft Research that's called Ether. I can't remember now what that stands for, but
They changed the name like 3 times in the last year.
Yeah,
probably.
and so I won't try to even repeat it because it'll be outdated, just like anything else we talk about AI within a second. But researchers who have been working in these areas for their life as their lifelong work to help tackle some of these hard problems as they come up, as we see them in the development process. And then, of course, our engineering teams who are critical for embedding responsible AI within the products. And so we've focused a lot of the work in those areas as we've moved forward. And it is not just, again, it's not just publishing principles. It is not just publishing a standard. You've got to back that up with culture change in your organization, training, awareness, explaining why it's important as you move from the principle level to the practice level. So
Great.
with that, pass it over to someone else to build on that.
Yep.
Yeah, I can
Hema.
add to that, right? So as my role within AMD as the Director of Advocacy for AI and for Responsible AI, we just started the journey. I mean, Shelley with Microsoft has been looking at this for a while, and we are kind of trying to build on what the industry is already thinking about. And so one thing I would say is, I've been in multiple places, so I can say this because responsible AI is so important that it cannot be a volunteer ragtag force like in pockets doing good things, right? It has to really come from the top. So it has to be the senior management who says this is a strategic initiative. And so that really sets the kind of the way things should happen after that, because it is an investment that requires, because you're trying to talk about the things that we know. If you think of any IT project, you think of people, you think of process, you think of technology, right? But then you have to think more. For AI, there is many more dimensions, but people are kind of at the center of it. And to kind of really put this in place, right, you really need somebody at the top who's willing to kind of, see this as important. And so that, I think we are able to convince our management, and I'm happy that we have the support from the top saying this is an important thing to do. Now, if I come to the people, people, I'll keep, there's so much talk about the process, and there's so much talk about the technology, which is, when you talk about the technology, it's not like a software. People kind of say, AI is just another software. No, it's not. It's just not. Because it's much more. You have to think about the data that's being used for it. And the data has got history. So you're taking in a lot of history. And so your data and the model, and then you're talking about the systems that house this data, the policies, and the kind of all the bias that you're talking about, it's all within those, right? So you have to think multiple dimensions when you're thinking about it. But I think at the center, it's going to be always the people. That the human-centeredness is something, when you're thinking responsible AI, that should be kind of the center of it. You have to think about what does it mean to our employees, our customers and partners, and the people who are impacted by the technology and the society at large. So that is kind of the frame that we have to build. And then as we think about people who are at the table having these discussions, right? It's the diversity of thought, diversity of function, diversity of voices. These are all things that should be kind of addressed while you're kind of building the people part of it. And then you have the process part of it, where you have to have the right governance models, the pillars, the principles that Shelley was talking about. How do you really make that real, right? Because I'll throw one statistic, right? There is the technology leaders are looking and saying, oh, we want to adopt AI. Everybody's like, I want to adopt AI, right? It's like 80% is the number that you'll hear where people saying we want to adopt. But have you put it in practice? Have you put responsible AI in practice? Less than 20% or 25%, right? So
really thinking about those core principles and ideas. I can say, personally experiencing this as an employee, the level of emphasis on the cultural change that I think that Shelley, you referred to earlier, feels like the same kind of cultural change many of our organizations have been going through over the last 10 years regarding security. that the training, the reinforcement through policy, the leadership messages and everything else are really, in some regards, we're being bombarded with them, but I think it's good in the way that this becomes muscle memory, and we need to think about our practices around AI in the same way, that it becomes muscle memory, and that all of these practices and policies and everything else become front and center in the way we approach the implementation of this technology.
It's muscle memory. It's a new muscle we have to build.
It's a new muscle we have to build. We talked a little bit, Yesha, I know you've got a strong point of view on this. We talked a little bit about some of the recent regulation and regulatory movements. We just had an executive order come out from President Biden earlier this week. There's movements in the EU regarding privacy policy extensions around AI. You know, everything from disclosures and transparency on models or what have you. What role do you all think that regulation is going to play versus, say, voluntary programs in companies in how we implement AI and AI governance in our organizations?
It's an awesome question, Nina. You know, the regulatory picture here is so, on the face of it, it looks like, you know, we're trying to get to regulation. We had this executive order that came out, you know, this week. It had some very nice bullet points that spoke to the need for safety and security, that spoke to the fact of trying to protect our privacy rights, that spoke to the fact of trying to create innovation around, you know, terrific AI in America. So certainly those are things that sound exactly right, what we need to do, but it's, you know, it's the problem is in implementing it. So the executive order, I think, is worth spending a little bit of time on, because that's going to really drive and create a framework for regulation going forward. That's what President Biden has instructed a number of different agencies to do. And it revolves around three major headings. Firstly, to create research around AI itself. What the heck are we talking about? What is the full potential of AI? And number two, to try and get to a place where AI can be implemented safely, as we've been talking about, within our daily lives. For example, in relation to health and housing, in relation to, you know, financial services and so forth, in our, you know, and in a way that protects our privacy. And number three, trying to deal with the Skynet risk. You know, the risk that, for example, genetic technology might be manipulated to create new kinds of viruses and so forth. You know, that really sci-fi type of situation, you know, Terminator 3 or 4, whatever it was. That is the, you know, that's the, you know, the big headline item there. But these are all really hard things to actually do in practice. There are some serious hurdles that regulators are going to come up against. Firstly, in just trying to research what the heck AI is, right? We're all at very early stages. We're developing. It feels extremely novel. We're still trying to understand the full potential of that technology. So it becomes really hard for us to really think about regulating it. You know, regulators are also looking to get a handle on what these algorithms do. They want to know the code. That's a very controversial thing here. It's not easy for trade secrets law and other things to get to see the actual code. So subpoenaing codes, being able to get into those, you know, black boxes, that's going to be a real tough sell for regulators to make. To the industry, that's been historically a contentious issue, is going to be hard to get. And then number three, you know, issues with respect to privacy. We don't have privacy in the US. You know, no constitutional right to privacy in the US, right? We have state-based, discrete regimes. So how do we navigate that when we see the big potential of AI? And then finally, we have a regulatory state that's incredibly complicated. Implementing it coordinated-wise across the entire apparatus of the different alphabet soup of regulation that we have is super complicated. We saw that with COVID. This is going to be, you know, next level in that context. So, you know, the regulation is going to be difficult to achieve. We haven't even talked about the international picture. So this is why what Shelley and Hema have been talking about, the private initiatives, the muscle memory, as Nina mentioned, to create, you know, responsible AI from the bigger companies that are dominant in this space, that are going to be dominant for a long time. That is going to have very strong network effects across the industry as a whole. So the practices that Shelley mentioned, responsible AI, you know, what Hema was talking about, in the absence of having a clear framework for top-down regulation, we really need the industry to get on board and do this properly and responsibly and safely, with an eye towards privacy, even though there's so much interest and commercial gain from, you know, consuming and analyzing data. that having a handle and muscle memory about responsible AI is going to play a really strong role to create private governance unless we can get a really strong public framework in place. So sorry to kind of go on a bit on that, but I think it's
points.
worthwhile for us to be realistic on what we have regulatory wise.
Yeah.
Shelley, hey man, anything
Yeah.
you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Somebody said in the first presentation, it's UK going first or US going first, and so that's kind of where we are. Everybody's trying to be there first, and we saw the executive order come just in time before the UK summit that's happening, right? And so everybody's trying to kind of say, okay, what should we do about regulation? And there are, in an ideal world, we all somehow create a framework that everybody knows what the fair rules are, and that you have somebody, a third party, that's kind of looking and saying, well, did you play by the rules or not, like a referee. Like, you would have some framework that we all will think about together, right? But unfortunately, what is happening is, with the regulation discussion and with the social media, we are kind of forming two different kind of groups. One is saying, I don't want any regulation because you're going to stop innovation. And the other group is saying, if you don't do regulation, there's existential threat. Like, you'll have like Terminator kind of scenarios, right? So they're playing it up. Like, the truth is somewhere in kind of, we have to plan for what can go really wrong, but we have to also have the ability to get AI to do all the good things it can do. So I think if you were to put people in a room and ask some questions without social media, maybe we'll get to a better answer. But the problem right now is there are kind of camps forming about whether there should be regulation or whether there should not be. I think there is room for meaningful regulation because this is about, it's going to impact people, so there is room for meaningful regulation. But that's where the balance is, how much do you regulate without just clamping everything down? Because if you're asking people to kind of give their code for being inspected by the government, I think you're kind of getting into new places where you may just say, I don't want to do this anymore, kind of, because I won't have a business to run. So at the same time, the foundation models that they're going to build and somebody else is going to adopt it could create all the problems that we don't want: the copyright infringement, harm to to your health and safety, and of course bigger things. So this requires, I think we are in the very early part of the journey, and this is about the governments, the academia, the public institutions, people, all of us, the public oversight, all of this has to come together. And this is not just the US, not just the UK. I think at some level, ideally we want an international coming together, but that's the hardest part. But at least where we should be focusing is each one of us, as we are doing this, right? What does responsible AI mean? What can we do? What is that framework that we can think within our space, right? At a minimum, we should all be doing that. And then we should kind of influence government. It's not like the government lawmakers know what is AI. And without knowing what is AI, how are they going to regulate it, right? So they're looking for input from the people who are going to be using or who are going to be impacted to say what it should be. So I think it's a long journey. We are just at the starting.
Yeah, and I think, given the diverse set of voices that we've heard all of our panelists mention involved in this conversation, this is a board level discussion. It affects every part of the organization, and those voices need to be represented in your programs as you look at this going forward. Shelley, we talked a little bit about workforce impacts. And we hear everything kind of along the Terminator lines with, my job's going to be replaced to this is going to be a huge productivity gain and everything in between. What do we believe the impacts are going to be, and how do we as leaders navigate this dialogue with more of a growth mindset?
Yeah, let me, sorry, I just wanted to add on to the previous conversation.
Oh, of course.
The workforce issue, which is, I think, kind of sort of plus one to what folks have said, but I think it's also important to understand that the regulation is going toward like the high risk scenarios. It's going toward foundational models. And there is a lot today that does not fit into that category that we are going to learn from. So I just want to make sure that people take away, like every AI that you look at is not the same. And there are some things that enterprises and people are going to be deploying now that's going to, bring, drastic improvements to people's lives and to their work without raising issues as you see in things like healthcare and things like national security issues, those kinds of scenarios. So just important to keep in mind as you're confronted with these issues. But to the workforce issue, there is no doubt that AI is going to change our workforce. And we need to all be ready for that. And I think some of the most important things we can do is in terms of education, thinking about how we're skilling up people to use AI in their own work, how we are thinking, how can we use AI in a way that, for example, bridges decades of education inequality for women, underrepresented minorities in, for example, the developer space. With our tool, GitHub Copilot, I'm a lawyer, and I was able to program a simple function with it. Now, I'm not gonna go be able to create like a massive program that I'm gonna ship and make $1 zillion shipping my wonderful app, but I can do some basic things. And as this gets better and better and better, I think what we will see is it will bring a more diverse set of people into the technology space, which I think is fantastic. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have problems of, some jobs that have, highly repetitive things that we can then automate. But it also means, how do you skill up those workers that are working in those jobs to do their jobs more effectively? As a lawyer, again, I always love to use the example of I don't want to rewrite the force majeure clause every time I create a contract. Luckily, I don't have to do that today, but those are the kinds of things that we think about when we think how this is going to help us be more effective. And then importantly, the other thing that I like to highlight from a study that we did on developers and use of our tool is that there was a 75% increase in developer happiness. And that is not a productivity gain statistic. That is a happiness statistic because they did not have to repeat things over and over again. They were able to really accelerate what they were doing. So I think we will see some gains like that. So it's going to be a massive trade-off from that perspective. We're going to get more, we're going to be able to accelerate our productivity. We are going to be, in many cases, happier, but we also have to recognize that there are definitely categories of things that are just going to be done differently, and we'll have to reskill people.
Excellent. I'm going to open it up for some closing comments on that. We want to talk about resources. I think I'm getting the sign from the back that we're about out of time. Final thoughts from our panelists.
If I could take one thing I want to kind of say, because in continuation with what came up in the panels before, and we're talking about DEI, I just want to leave that. And Shelley talked about the high-risk scenario, right? I mean, I've been in the healthcare. I'm not so much entertainment, but in the healthcare, right? So I just been looking for a tool like AI because it has got this magic capability, in terms of compressing time and cost. So I feel so happy when I see an AI because it can create so many things that is not possible in terms of finding cure for cancer or finding new drugs and all of that. But then I have seen it up close what it can do if the voices are not taken into consideration, right? I think if you think about it, like from women, I mean, it's not about women or about men, but just thinking about women, right? The clinical trials, women were not part of clinical trials until 1993. Just think about that, right? So there is, again, it goes back to data, right?
Yeah.
There is no data that describes what we collectively will go through when we have some problems. So when you think about a heart problem, there is no information that tells you what does a woman experience it differently, right? Like if you say a heart, you can't breathe well, or you have chest pain, that's mostly what they've seen the symptoms for men. For women, it's nausea. It's in addition to the chest pain, it's nausea, it's stomach pain, it's back pain. Now, if you don't have this data and you're creating AI based on that data, you are causing more harm. So
yeah, and this is no different than the data and analytics discussion we've been having for years. If you build analytics models based on historical data, all you're doing is repredicting the past. And you need to think about things like, how do you supplement your data sources with underrepresented communities in the digital divide to be able to predict a new future, not repredicting the past. Sorry, it got me on my soapbox.
Totally right. I think that is a discussion. I just took you to healthcare, but bringing it back to Hollywood, Sharon Stone, right? She's saying, I'm having a brain hemorrhage. She doesn't know it is a brain hemorrhage. She's explaining what's happening to her, but it was largely ignored. And it was a brain hemorrhage, and there was brain bleeding, and that led to severe loss of her capabilities, right? And created so many social issues for her. But this problem is real in that the data is what we have to pay attention to. We have to pay attention to the model that is using the data, the policies within the data. So I think, in terms of DEI, right, I think the voices, as more voices come into and kind of say, what is that going to impact me as a person who goes into a healthcare system, or a person who's going into an education, who have my kids in the education system. So I just want to bring it back to that. Unless we all kind of sit and think what AI can do to us in our lives, at work, with our kids, if we open up the discussion space, I think we will go a long way. And I can go the whole half an hour talking about
I know,
it.
we could probably talk about this for an hour or so. Yesha, final thoughts.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I mean, I think one thing that we need to, we were talking a lot about the international picture. There are major countries in play here. China obviously has a massive amounts of centralized data. Other countries too, obviously we talked about Europe, UK, India. But we have to be aware that the action is going to be here. It's going to be in California. It's going to be where you guys are sitting. The companies that are leading the charge are here. And so the standards that are being produced here are going to be globally exported and are going to be globally, mechanized. So we have to get this right. As Hema is saying, getting all of the, stakeholder voices, getting data that is representative and clear, it's going to be central to making these good models. But, we have to discipline ourselves. There's going to be so many temptations for us to, put profit before people, to use that data to make, products that market to, kids or whatever. We've seen this happen time and time again. This is a technology. It's going to depend on how it's used. How we use it in this country is going to have massive effects across the world and for all time. So we need to be super careful and put the people before always just focusing on what the bottom line is going to be here.
Awesome, thank you. And Shelley, you want to bring it home for us?
I'll let them last word. I know over time, so just say thank you very much. I thought there were some great points on the panel, and I hope everyone learned a lot.
Awesome.
And thank you guys. Thank you for me too.
Thank you to our panelists. I do want to quickly point out a couple resources that you can leverage to start your own AI journeys. The Microsoft Office of Responsible AI, they've open sourced all the materials there. If you search on Bing for this, you will find all of those materials. The one I found most interesting was Building a Foundation for AI Success, a Leader's Guide, which is a white paper you can download. And there's a lot of information about the risk management framework that's been published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I'm certain there's more with the other vendors and our sponsors who've been here as well. But do your research and start bringing in those diverse voices within your organization, because it's just so important to have all of those voices represented as you start this journey. Thank you once again for our panelists. Yesha, I hope you're feeling better soon. And we'll move it on to Guy and the rest of the team.
Great panel. Thank you so much. Amazing.